All right, so today's session is covering the source control integration features that Rollbar has. So we're mostly going to talk about how you can better integrate Rollbar as a code improvement platform and as a code quality tool, and tie that into the changes that are being made to your code base and by whom. All right, so couple of housekeeping items before we get started with the educational material. So this is a Zoom webinar by default. All attendees are muted. If you do have a question that is best asked over the microphone, feel free to drop a note in the chat or the Q&A. We do also have those systems for questions. I'll go back and review the questions at the end if they're not a natural fit for the conversation flow. Really, any way that you can get a question, either the Q&A, the chat, or if you would prefer to speak up, all of those are perfectly fine. All right, and just a review of the things that we will cover today. So we've got just introducing the sort of the integration point between Rollbar. Oops, went ahead one slide on accident there. So we'll talk about Rollbar and source control, what they do together. Then we will look at the deploy tracking feature where you can notify the Rollbar platform of the deploys that you're making. Then we'll talk about version tracking, a feature that's available to folks on the advanced and enterprise plans. And then we will look at the code context feature in Rollbar. We'll look at that in depth, and I'll demo how to get that set up to properly show the get blame and the code context that you get from that integration. All right, so first off, let's just introduce this integration a little bit more about what we're going to be doing here. So the source control integration is going to give us better context around the errors that we see in Rollbar. So when we report these things, it gives us an indication that something is wrong with the code, as long as we can pinpoint that to being a code problem and not something that's maybe wrong with the infrastructure. And then once we do identify that it is a problem that originates in the code, we have better context, we have more information to more quickly solve that problem and to get it right the first time. So this, we'll see it in action, how this becomes beneficial when you can see directly from Rollbar into some of the other platforms that you would most likely be using as a part of this workflow. So by making that connection, the benefit of having that stack trace linked there, it's going to show you the right version of code because that's a component for getting that integration working. And then you'll also be able to see the list of commits that are bundled together with each deploy. So we're going to be showing all of this useful info inside of the Rollbar web app, but then most of the places where we show it, it's also going to include links back to your GitHub domain. So you don't have to stay on Rollbar, but you're going to have that information available there. All right, so deploy tracking, this is specific to the deploys that you're making elsewhere. And really the main thing that's happening here is that you're choosing to notify Rollbar of those things. So resolving with a commit message, that's this is something that's, I think it was first brought up probably with the item workflow video in the Rollbar Academy series, where as we're talking about what to do with these items as you work through them, investigate them, and then ultimately fix them, this is a way to streamline that. And then when we talk about the deploy process, this is something else, another benefit you can get from the deploy notifications. By tying Rollbar into this, you will then have better aggregate statistics for version health and stuff like that. And it's also enabled by the deploys and their notifications to the Rollbar system. So when you're looking at this, this is an example of a very simple commit message that would resolve a Rollbar item. So it's simple to tag these. You can just use the Rollbar item counter. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So whatever your item counter is, you can just drop that into a commit message if you want to do an automatic resolve there. All right. It looks like that one kind of glitched for a second. And then this is also tying into the deploy tracking. We'll look at this feature when I move over into the demo. For this, I just have a couple of slides that are sort of adjacent to the topic of the deploy tracking menu. But this is another one also tied in with item workflow and sort of the housekeeping of your Rollbar account. You can set up auto resolve for each environment. And one of the choices you have for that is the auto resolve on deploy. So that's not quite as explicitly linked as doing resolve via commit messages. I don't think it does automatic aggregate statistics if you do it this way. I'll have to double check, but what this is going to do for you is it gives you a fresh start every time you do send another deploy through. So if something does happen to be resolved in a given deploy, even if you didn't mark it that way, even if you didn't know that it happened, this is going to clean up your list for you automatically. Since these items, since items in the resolved state are just going to reactivate if they do appear again, then you're not going to lose any signal here. Anything that shows up after the deploy is reactivated, and thus you don't lose any signal on that. And the auto resolve on time window, this is included here just because these features work together and they sort of overlap one another. You can choose either to do this on deploy or after a time window. And here, that's just something where you can choose a sort of an expiration timer for your items. So this again brought up on the item workflow, item management session, but somewhat relevant here. All right, so after deploy tracking, we have version tracking. This is another way to tie in the insights that you get from across your CI/CD process and sort of integrate that with Rollbar as well. So just a reminder, this is a feature that is only available to folks on the advanced and enterprise plans. So those being some of the plans with higher ingest and some of the more enterprise related features. But what it's going to do, excuse me there, it's going to show you that version health and give you a better idea of when problems are being introduced, as well as allowing you to track user experience across the different versions. You'll be able to more accurately identify that problems are tied to a specific code revision, or maybe that they're not. So with version tracking, you can do these things. You're also, I think this ties in again with the resolve and commit messages with all that info coming back in. But it gives us a new starting point for our investigation. And when we talk about things like deployment rollbacks, if you try to automate that process, one way I've seen that done is to track the version health using our API. You can pinpoint these versions, and through that, identify if maybe there's too many errors in a specific version that can give you information to target a certain deploy and roll that back. So resolving inversion, this is another way to just tie in the item workflow to what you're doing. With the items that do appear in your web app, one of the options you have to resolve them through the UI is to choose a specific version that will mark that as resolved. And that's particularly useful for accounts that have multiple versions of code being used in production. The example that always comes to mind for me is the Android OS fragmentation. That Android as a mobile operating system has so many different versions to accommodate all the different phones and manufacturers and things. And so it's very likely that multiple versions of your code are being used by end users if that's the type of software product that you have. And so in those cases, you don't really want to continue to be notified about errors that are happening in an older version of your code, because that's not really a code problem anymore. You've marked that as fixed in a newer code version. So if you if you do use the resolve inversion feature in Rollbar, that's going to give your platform more info. It helps it to not cause as much alert noise by sending in these irrelevant errors, or they'll still be sent in, but they won't trigger any notifications. All right, so finally, the code context portion. So now we'll pivot over into the demo. I'm done with my slides here. Always try to get that done as quickly as possible. Nobody likes slides. So what we're doing for this is I'm taking my sample JS demo app that I have here, and I'm going to show that it's not currently displaying my git blame info, and then I will walk through the steps to arrive at that. So one thing to note here is that we're going to set up the code version variable inside of our code. We're going to do it in a way that does enable the versions feature. If you're not on the right plan for that, it's not going to cause any problems. It's something where the more advanced stuff from the versions feature is locked off until you're on that plan. All right, so I have a project called JS Demo here, and I use this one just to show mechanical demos for the most part. So clicking the $100 donation button throws an error, $25 button throws a different one. There's no real mystery here. These are just methods that I'm using in the code, but the problem is the methods aren't defined. So that's an error. Rollbar picks it up as such. See if I can refresh this to make sure these are coming through. So here it shows these errors occurred just within the last 30 seconds. Those are my two code errors that I have there. But when I look at these, I'm getting the coordinates. This is a default feature in Rollbar. You're always going to get coordinates if you have a stack trace. But what I'm not seeing is any sort of code context info here. This is where I expect to see it. And if I were using an account that did not have the feature enabled, then there would be a tooltip here. Let me quickly pivot to one of my other ones that I think does have that set up that way. So here, this is another demo that I use. When source control is not even set up, then there will be a tooltip here to remind you to do that. But we're not going to see the type of git blame that we will once this is enabled and working correctly. So there's that for reference. And we do have a docs page specific to code context, but I've gotten a couple of remarks from customers recently that it's not very clear. And I think I would agree with that based on the server route that we see being used in this example. To me, it's not all that clear. I had to get some help to enable that. So hopefully this session will help demystify any confusion there. So this is the web page. It's nothing crazy. There's some basic code down here. We have the missing methods. But where I'm going to be making changes to get my code context enabled, on the code side, I'm going to be changing the config. So if you follow through the docs, there's a few things you have to do. You have to enable the Git integration and properly link your GitHub account to your Rollbar account. I've already done this, so I'll just show you where you can find the settings menus for that. So in your user settings, this is where you can connect to your GitHub account. So GitHub, connect with GitHub. Mine is actually connected to my personal account. I sort of have those overlapping here. And you have it, as long as you have it connected through one of the accounts that's able to look at these settings, that does enable it. But you'll have to make sure that the user account has the proper permissions for that. So I think utility accounts are sometimes created for this, or maybe you just have one of your GitHub owners, somebody that's an admin on that side and has all the correct visibility permissions to make this connection here. All right, so you have to make sure that's connected. Then under the settings at the project level, there's going to be a connection for your source control. So sorry, I went through that a little fast. For those that are newer to the settings, there's sort of two levels of settings menu. You need to go to the projects, And then from the projects list, click on the one that you're going to configure. So here for me, it's JS demo. In here, there's a menu specific to source control. So I'll be clicking on that. And then within the source control menu, I have to link it. So this is where it asks what user I've connected. You can disconnect and reconnect there. So if you're starting out, there will just be a few buttons for GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab. We will be releasing our first version of GitHub Enterprise. I think that's slated for later this year. So it's not currently available, but it will be soon. So for GitHub, once you've made that connection, let me just do this again as a show of good faith here. I can remove that integration and connect back through to GitHub. Maybe I should have just let that stay for time's sake. All right, so there's that. Connect to GitHub, and this is where it links my user account there. So there's my GitHub username. And then I'll select my repository here. So it's JS demo. I just named it the same. And in this case, my project root is just going to be a /. So present directory, call it what you want. That just means take it from the top level. Because in this GitHub repo, there's only one file. This is designed to be a portable demo. So that means that there's no subfolders here to point to where this is located. So index.html. All right, so next, following along with the docs, we need to make sure that our code has, let's see, we've enabled the integration. We have to set the server.root and the code version properties on the code side of things. And this is how we're telling this is how the occurrences are going to supply the necessary information to the platform when they send their events. And that way the platform can link them through the integration. So let's go back and do this. Since I'm using Git and I push these, I get these hashes that come through the hexadecimal values for my commits. That's what I use as my version. Let's just go ahead and copy this here. So I'm going to need to add that to my code. So these go inside the payload object in your configs. So environment production, then I'll do code version. There is my hexadecimal value. And then I need to do server.root. So what I typically just do here is a server object with the root inside of it. And this is where the docs get a little tricky. And to me, they don't necessarily make this very clear for folks that are trying to get this set up. So here in server.root, it says to use something like this base directory, home deploy www.mox. Well, if I look at the screenshots and stuff here, so that would point me to right here. And then this would still be mox views item.py. That's very confusing, not really telling me what I need to know. So let's try to clarify this using the example that I have. So in this demo, since I'm taking a basic HTML page and just running it by opening it from my drive, this is where mine is going to be a little different, and I think this will probably conform more to your expectations, or this should help clarify this. So what my server.root is going to be, it's not going to be some sort of github.com path. It's not going to be some website. If this was deployed on the web, then it would be. But since this is being accessed locally, and this is the path that I see, this is going to be my server.root, is the home folder of where this stuff lives on my MacBook. So looking at this, it's the JS demo. So that's my home, because that's where this is coming from. So adding this, I'll save that. And then I will refresh my page and send these events again. And if I'm really lucky, it will have worked the first try. Rarely is that the case, but we'll see if I made any sort of typos along the way. All right, so JS demo. Uh-oh, we got a couple of new errors here. So message is not defined. Now, if I look down here, this is the code context that I've been raving about this whole webinar session that we were ultimately going to get to. So instead of just seeing the coordinates, instead of just having a list of places where the trace originated, now we're going to see the code inside of Rollbar. I've got a get blame and a ±5. And since it has the version info and it ties that back to a certain commit, I can see that some culprit here, this David Waller guy, committed some code, and this is the last thing that was changed. This is the top of the frame, and this is what we're seeing as the correct version based on what I sent in. So I'm sure you'll know that the code version is not usually hard coded like this, and technically this would be a different version since I've if I push my code, then that would be deployed as a new version. So typically your version is sort of auto-populated from your domain. But the server root, this I think is a little more static if you're hosting it on a website, depending on how that works. But this is the full stack trace here. So basically the only thing that I had to leave off of the path in order to get my root was the name of the file. But that's also because this is a very simple repo in GitHub and a very simple folder for me in Git or in my home directory there. So last couple of things, that's it for the code context setup. Just to briefly look at the version and deploy menu, since those are relevant here. So the versions menu, when you see this, I can have multiple projects showing. I think that's where you get into the advanced and enterprise plans. But this is going to give me some nice aggregate statistics to show code health. So the traffic light here, new errors, reactivated errors, and those that have been resolved in a version. Most folks are concerned mostly with the red light, of course, but I can investigate from here. I can start with the version and sort of drill down into this to see maybe is there a pattern across these errors that first appeared in this version. If it's something that is similar across all of these, maybe it's a single bad variable that appears in multiple places or something like that. And so you may know that you can fix a handful just with a single code fix there. And then deploy tracking, this is where I actually don't have this on my demo account because I'm not doing any CI/CD stuff. So let's take a peek at the Rollbar, the meta Rollbar account, just to see what a deploys menu is going to look like. So from here, you can see that there's been a few deploys made. It looks like one of our devs was messing around with a revision number here, just ABC. And then we can see when we're getting into the stuff where real code changes are happening, we've got the commits that are being made here. We can see the revision that we're tying that back to, and you can click to view that in GitHub as well. So I think I skimmed over that from before. That's also available as a part of these messages that we get. So clicking the Octocat, going to take me back to the code, point me specifically at this problem, allow me to view the blame and any other stuff that I need from GitHub. All right, so I'll leave a few minutes for Q&A. Let me read through the chat to see if there are any questions I can answer. It looks like Gabby's been helping me with some of these links along the way. So yeah, the question about the more advanced stuff. So the deploy tracking is available for anybody, and tying in your versions to your items, that is not restricted to just the upper tiers. So this stuff is still very helpful. The code context is available to all users. You don't have to have any plans for that, or you don't have to have any paid or advanced plans for that. I think you can even do that on the trial account. Um, so the just to be clear, the version tracking is the only thing that you would not have access to without those upper tiers. All right, and I don't think I see any other questions. Thanks everyone for joining today. I hope this has been useful. I will be looking to follow up on the documentation to clarify that server root stuff, but hopefully this helps to get that job done. All right, thanks, and hope you have a great day.